What? How could you say that to me? I rejected Richie's proposal because of you. And now you do this to me. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you found the story interesting. Thanks. In a quiet town, there lived a young, wealthy young man named Richie. He was kind, gentle, and deeply in love with his girlfriend, Lizzy. For 2 years, they dated, shared dreams, and talked about the future. Richie believed she was the one. He decided it was time to settle down. So, he booked the most expensive hotel in the city to propose to her. Unknown to Lizzy, everything was planned candles, roses, lights, and a golden ring. Richie wanted this to be a moment she would never forget. That day, Richie held her hand and led her to the hotel. Lizzy smiled, pretending to be surprised. But deep inside, she wasn't happy. She had another man in her heart, Nathan. She didn't love Richie, only his money. As they entered the hall, her eyes widened. The room sparkled with decorations, soft music played, and guests cheered in excitement. Waitresses in fine uniforms served drinks. The lights dimmed. Richie knelt before her, holding the ring. "Will you be mine forever?" he asked. But instead of joy, Lizzy's face fell. She froze. Her heart raced not from love, but fear. She couldn't marry Richie, not when her heart belonged to Nathan. Without saying a word, Lizzy turned and ran out of the hall. Guests gasped. Richie stayed on his knees, confused, crushed, and humiliated. His friends rushed to console him, but their words felt empty. Just as he was about to leave the ring behind, he looked to his left and saw her, a waitress, quiet, beautiful, and watching him with gentle eyes. Her name was Ruby. Something about Ruby felt different. Richie's heart whispered, "What if?" Without thinking too much, he walked up to her and said, "Will you marry me instead? I'll pay you 10 million naira." Ruby's eyes widened, unsure if it was a joke. But seeing the sadness in Richie's eyes, she nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. What Richie didn't know was this Ruby was Lizzy's cousin. She had been quietly working at the hotel to support her poor family, never knowing fate would choose her that day. 2 weeks passed. Richie never tried to call Lizzy again. She had changed her number, thinking he would chase after her, but Richie had moved on. Ruby resigned from her job, and soon their wedding preparations began. Invitations were printed, top decorators hired, and expensive fabrics bought. Everyone in town whispered about the poor waitress who was now marrying a millionaire. Meanwhile, Lizzy was still working in her office, unaware of what was coming. She thought she had broken Richie, but life had a surprise waiting. Nathan, Lizzy's secret boyfriend, was Richie's old schoolmate. He received a wedding invitation from Richie and planned to attend. He told Lizzy, "We'll be attending a friend's wedding soon." She smiled, excited to go with him. On the wedding day, Lizzy dressed in her finest gown, her face glowing. Together, she and Nathan walked into the grand event center. The hall shimmered with chandeliers, soft music floated through the air, and laughter echoed across the room. Then she saw him, Richie, sitting proudly beside Ruby as bride. They were both smiling, glowing in love. Lizzy's heart stopped. Her eyes blinked, confused. Is that? No, it can't be. But it was. Richie and Ruby stood up and walked to the stage as the MC invited them for their first dance. Cameras flashed. Guests clapped. Lizzy's heart pounded. My ex? And my cousin? Getting married? She couldn't breathe. Shame and regret washed over her. She excused herself from Nathan and slipped out of the hall. At home, Lizzy paced the room, restless. How? She asked. How did this happen? Her phone buzzed. It was Nathan. Where are you, Lizzy? He asked. She hesitated. Tears filled her eyes. She had chased money and lost everything. Her man, her pride, her peace. Meanwhile, Ruby, the once poor waitress, was now celebrated as a queen. Not because of the money, but because fate honored her humility. And Richie? He found a wife not in the place he expected, but in the heart that stayed when all others left. The morning after Richie and Ruby's lavish wedding, the city still buzzed with talk of their union. Social media flooded with pictures, hashtags, and admiration for Ruby's grace and Richie's surprise decision. But far from the spotlight, in a quiet room dimly lit by early sun rays, Lizzie's phone rang. It was Nathan. "Lizzy," he said calmly, "why did you leave the wedding hall without saying anything?" Silence. Her throat dried up. Her fingers trembled. She stammered, unsure of where to start. But her heart couldn't hold it anymore. She sighed deeply and let it all out. "I didn't tell you before, but Richie, he was my boyfriend. We dated for 2 years. The proposal was for me. That whole event was planned for me," she said with a trembling voice. "But I ran away because I thought I loved you." Nathan went quiet for a moment. Then he chuckled. "I'm not mad," Nathan replied coldly. "Truth is, I never planned to marry you, Lizzy. I was just enjoying what you gave me. The gifts, the money, the softness." Those words slapped harder than a palm. Lizzie's heart cracked. 2 weeks later, after giving herself time to think, Lizzie asked timidly during dinner, "Nathan, when are you going to propose?" Nathan, without lifting his head from his food, replied, "I'm not ready for marriage now. If you find someone else, you can go ahead." Lizzie's fork dropped. Her heart stopped. "What? How could you say that to me?" she gasped. "I rejected Richie's proposal because of you." Nathan raised his eyes slowly, with no pity. "I never asked you to do that," he said. "Besides, I can't marry you. I'm not financially stable." Lizzie froze. The room felt colder than a freezer. She sat back in her chair, eyes wide, lips quivering. Her mind raced. "What have I brought upon myself?" she whispered to herself. Nathan stood up, grabbed his keys, and without another word, walked out. But he wasn't heading to work. He was going to see Mandeeth woman he truly loved. Lizzie sat alone, unmoving. The tick of the clock echoed like thunder in her ears. Everything inside her screamed shame, anger, heartbreak. She had traded a future of love and honor for a man who never truly saw her. The air around her was thick with regret, but it was too late to undo the past. She thought of Richie, how his eyes searched the crowd that night, how broken he must have felt. And she wasn't even brave enough to say goodbye. She ghosted him, believing she had chosen love over luxury. But she had only chosen lies over loyalty. That night, Lizzie wept, not the soft kind, but the raw, heaving kind that left her chest sore and her pillow soaked. She had no appetite, no peace, no direction. Meanwhile, Mandy's apartment lit up with laughter. Nathan wrapped his arms around her from behind as she stirred soup in the kitchen. "You left her, right?" Mandy asked with a sly smile. Nathan kissed her neck. "I told her straight. I'm done pretending." Mandy chuckled, satisfied. "Good, because I'm not sharing." But beneath Mandy's charm hid a different motive. She wasn't in love with Nathan, she was in love with his connections, his generosity, and the illusion of being chosen. Back at her apartment, Lizzie stood before a mirror. Her reflection looked like a stranger puffy eyes, cracked lips, lifeless gaze. Nathan and Mandy's wedding was nothing like the loud, flower-drenched hall where Richie once proposed. It was small, just family, a few friends, and a quiet vow exchanged beneath a mango tree in Mandy's village. There were no trending hashtags, no viral photos, but their eyes locked with a rare kind of peace and agreement to build from scratch, to love with what they had. Within a year, they welcomed a baby boy. Nathan named him Caleb. The little boy's cries filled their small flat with purpose. Diapers replaced date nights, bottles over bouquets. But it was real. It was home. Meanwhile, in Richie and Ruby's world, luxury had become normal, but something was missing. Ruby had adjusted quickly to her new life. Coming from a home where meals were sometimes skipped and dreams were postponed for survival, she now walked in heels through glass buildings, ordered perfumes from Paris, and spoke softly into her mother's ear as she handed her business papers to sign. Ruby didn't forget her roots. She renovated her mother's crumbling shop into a mini-mart and opened 2 more branches in nearby towns. Her mother often cried at night, not from pain, but from the miracle of a daughter who broke the cycle of poverty. But 3 years in, Their joy was clouded. There were no tiny feet echoing in the mansion. No baby cries. No birthday balloons. At first, it was hopeful silence. Ruby believed maybe they needed time. But with every month came whispers, questions, and her own growing anxiety. They visited one hospital after another. Blood work. Scans. More tests. Then one afternoon, at a specialist clinic far from the city, the doctor invited them into his office. He closed the blinds gently and sat across from them, his hands folded like a man carrying heavy news. "Mr. and Mrs. Richie," he began softly, "we have studied your results thoroughly. There's something you both need to know." Ruby's hands reached for Richie's. He held on. The doctor sighed. "Mr. Richie, based on the scans, your body sustained internal damage from the accident you had a few years ago, specifically trauma to your reproductive system. I'm very sorry to say this, but the results show you are currently unable to father a child." Silence. The room turned cold. Ruby's grip loosened. Richie's face went blank. His mind raced back to the car crash, how he had cheated death, but woke up months later thinking life had resumed as usual. "But," the doctor added gently, "there's hope. With treatment, hormone therapy, and possibly assisted reproductive techniques, there is still a chance. It might take time. It might not be easy. But the door is not closed." Richie nodded stiffly, but Ruby leaned forward. "What kind of treatment, doctor? How long will it take? What are the chances?" she asked with trembling lips. The doctor answered patiently, but Richie barely heard. His world had shifted. The empire he built, the wealth he had accumulated, suddenly felt small. When they got back to the car, Richie didn't start the engine. He just stared out the windshield, silent. Ruby placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's not the end, Richie," she whispered. "I married you, not just to have children. We're in this together." A tear slid down Richie's cheek. But deep inside, a war had begun. One not between husband and wife, but inside Richie himself. A battle of pride, guilt, and questions that no wealth could answer. The weeks after the doctor's revelation felt like an endless winter. The air between Richie and Ruby grew colder. The warmth they once shared now replaced with a quiet tension. Ruby tried her best, clinging to her optimism. She stayed close, comforting him with gentle words and assurances. But each passing day, Richie became more distant. It wasn't anger or bitterness, it was something far harder to face: embarrassment. Richie, the man who once held all the power, all the answers, now found himself in a place where he couldn't fix what mattered most to his wife. He wasn't a provider in the traditional sense anymore. His heart was heavy, and the guilt weighed on him like an anchor. When Ruby suggested starting treatment, Richie would nod, but his heart wasn't in it. He couldn't bring himself to look her in the eyes when he agreed. The thought of the invasive procedures, the tests that would try to alter the course of nature, he couldn't bear it. The idea of asking for help felt like an insult to everything he had achieved on his own. Ruby, on the other hand, refused to give up. She could feel the distance, the walls Richie was slowly building around himself, but she wouldn't allow the diagnosis to define their future. She poured herself into their business, started more projects, and even suggested adoption, but Richie's heart had closed like a fortress. One evening, Ruby sat at the dinner table, her plate untouched, while Richie sat across from her, staring at his phone. "Richie," she said softly, her voice trembling, "we need to talk about this. About us." Richie didn't look up. "We are talking." "No, Richie, we're not," Ruby replied, frustration creeping into her voice. "You've been shutting me out. I understand this is hard for you, but it's hard for me too. This isn't just your problem. We're in this together. Please talk to me." Richie exhaled deeply, placing his phone down on the table. His eyes met hers, but his expression was vacant. "What's the point, Ruby? What are we talking about? A treatment that might not work? Or a child I can't even give you?" The words hit her harder than any of the tests or diagnoses. It was the first time he had admitted it out loud, the unspoken fear, the failure. Ruby fought to keep her voice steady. "That's not fair, Richie. We agreed to face everything together. This isn't about you failing me. This is about us finding a way through this. Together." But Richie's frustration burst out. Do you know how hard it is to be the man who can't even give his wife a child? His voice cracked as he stood up and paced the room. I'm supposed to be your protector, your provider. I've always been the one who could solve everything, Rubby. But this is one thing I can't fix. Rubby stood too, her heart pounding in her chest. I didn't marry you for a child, Richie. I married you because I love you. And you know that. But I need you to be with me. I need to feel like you're still with me. Richie stopped pacing. The vulnerability in Rubby's voice made him pause. For the first time in weeks, he really looked at her, the woman he had loved from the beginning. The woman who had stood by him through everything: wealth, success, and now through his worst fear. But still, a part of him refused to let go of the pride that kept him silent. He could feel the shame, the sting of being less than what he had always been. No matter how many times Rubby reassured him, it never seemed enough. I don't know how to be this man, Richie admitted in a whisper. I don't know how to face you without feeling like I've failed you. Ruby's eyes softened. She reached for his hand, gently pulling him back to the table. You haven't failed me. You're human, Richie, and I'm here. We'll figure this out together. Please let me in. For a moment, Richie just stood there, frozen. The weight of his own pride was almost too much to let go of. But, after what seemed like an eternity, he slowly sank into the chair beside her. You promise? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I promise, Rubby replied, squeezing his hand. The room was silent for a moment, save for the hum of the air conditioning. But within the stillness, there was a flicker of hope. Mrs. Evelyn Okwu, Richie's mother, paid a visit. She was elegant and commanding, the kind of woman whose presence swallowed a room. She had carried the pride of raising an only child, and like many mothers in her circle, she dreamed of holding her grandchild soon after the wedding. But years had passed. Still no child. And in her eyes, Rubby was the reason. From the very first day, Evelyn had carried a subtle air of judgment toward Rubby. She never said it outright, but her eyes did. Her pauses, her remarks ended in heavy sighs. Rubby tried to bear it, brushing things off with a smile, reminding herself that patience was part of marriage. But one particular evening would change everything. Rubby stood in the grand kitchen, wearing a soft blue gown, her hair tied into a bun as she stirred a pot of vegetable soup. She hummed quietly, the scent of garlic and ugu leaves filling the air. Her heart felt heavy, but she kept her smile alive. Evelyn stepped into the kitchen, arms folded across her chest. Still cooking? She asked flatly. Yes, Mama. I'm making Richie's favorite, Rubby replied softly. Evelyn chuckled coldly. At least let food come from this house, since children refuse to come. Rubby froze. Her hand paused mid-stir. Her throat tightened. Evelyn continued. You know, in our time, if a woman hadn't conceived after 1 year, her place in her husband's house would be questioned. 3 years, Ruby? Are you even trying? Rubby turned her face away, blinking back tears. Evelyn smirked and leaned closer. You dress fine. Sit in a mansion. Call yourself a wife. But where is the fruit of your womb? My friends mock me quietly. I, Evelyn Okwu, no grandchild? From my only son? Rubby tried to breathe steadily. She bit her lower lip, holding back the tears that burned her eyes. Her silence was misunderstood. Nothing to say, huh? Evelyn scoffed. Maybe you knew you couldn't bear children before marriage. Some women are like that, secretive and selfish. A single tear slipped down Rubby's cheek as she stirred the pot, pretending not to feel her heart breaking. She said nothing, but a week later, she had had enough. Evelyn's stay became unbearable. Every word, every glance, every whisper was a thorn. Rubby began to avoid meals. She moved quietly, like a guest in her own home. She called her mother twice that week and cried silently while speaking. I don't know how much more I can take, Mama, she whispered. On Friday evening, after a particularly painful encounter at the dining table, where Evelyn had made another cutting remark about barren women, Rubby knew it was time. The tears she had bottled up came crashing out. She went upstairs, packed a small bag, and folded her wedding picture face down on the dresser. She didn't want to look at it. She tiptoed to the door, her heart pounding, but as she opened it, there he was. Richie. He looked worn from work, but when he saw her tear-streaked face and the bag in her hand, his heart stopped. "Rubby?" he asked, voice trembling. "Why are you crying? Where are you going?" Rubby couldn't hold back anymore. "I can't do this anymore, Richie," she said through sobs. "Your mother has made this house a nightmare for me. I've endured it for weeks, but today she called me barren. Again. I've done nothing wrong, Richie. I've stayed, I've prayed, I've hoped, but I'm done. I'm tired of fighting alone." She collapsed onto the floor, weeping, her bag dropping beside her. Richie knelt in front of her and held her hands. "Rubby," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know it had gotten this bad." She looked into his eyes. "Why haven't you told her the truth? Why must I keep bearing this alone?" Richie lowered his head in shame. "I was afraid of what she'd think of me, of what the world would say. But you're right. You've suffered enough." He stood up, his jaw clenched. "Stay right here." He walked straight to his mother's room. The air in the corridor was heavy with tension. Rubby sat frozen in the living room, her hands clenched. Richie knocked once and entered. Evelyn was seated on the bed, flipping through a magazine. "Richie?" she said, surprised. "Why are you back so early?" He didn't answer right away. He closed the door behind him. "Mama," he said quietly, "I came to talk to you, and I want you to listen carefully." She raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "You need to stop insulting Rubby," he said. Evelyn frowned. "Richie, that girl." "No," Richie interrupted firmly. "You need to stop. Right now. Because all the things you've been blaming her for, they're not her fault." "What are you talking about?" Richie swallowed. "I'm the reason we haven't had a child, Mama, not Rubby. Me. I had an accident a few years ago. It damaged my reproductive system. We've seen the tests. It's not her. It's me." Evelyn's face changed. Her jaw dropped slightly. She blinked, as if unsure whether she heard him right. "Mama," Richie continued, "I kept quiet because I was ashamed. But my silence hurt the woman I love. She's been enduring your words alone while I hid behind pride. I won't let that continue." There was silence. Evelyn slowly placed the magazine beside her. Her hands trembled slightly. "My son, are you sure?" Richie nodded. Evelyn was quiet for a long time, her lips parted, her face blank. When she finally stood, her eyes were no longer hard, they were confused, shaken. Without a word, she walked out of her room and descended the stairs. Rubby, still seated on the floor, looked up in surprise. Evelyn stood in front of her, eyes filled with something Rubby had never seen before regret. "Rubby," she began, her voice softer than usual, "I owe you an apology." Ruby's breath caught. "I've said terrible things to you, hurtful things. I blamed you. I mocked you, all without knowing the truth." She knelt slowly before Rubby. "I was wrong, deeply wrong. Please forgive me. I judged you based on my fears and expectations. I forgot you were someone's daughter, too. I'm sorry." Tears filled Ruby's eyes again, only this time they weren't from pain. "I forgive you, Mama," she whispered. Evelyn nodded, wiping her own eyes. Richie joined them and wrapped his arms around both women. For the first time in a long time, the house felt warm again, not because everything was suddenly perfect, but because truth had finally found its voice, and healing had begun. 6 months after that turning point, when honesty had cracked open the walls of silence and judgment, the house began to feel different in ways Rubby never expected. The days were filled with a newfound warmth, and the evenings with laughter that had been absent for so long. Ruby and Richie had poured their hearts into healing, and though the journey had been difficult, it had brought them closer than ever. The quiet moments, once tinged with tension, were now filled with shared glances and understanding. Then, one afternoon, as Rubby lay resting on the couch, a quiet wave of realization swept over her. The days of nausea and fatigue had become harder to ignore. She had waited for this moment, never quite allowing herself to believe it could really happen after all the years of longing. But now, in the soft quiet of the house, she knew. Richie had been at work when she decided to take the test. Her heart raced as she clutched the test in her hands. A baby. A real baby. She couldn't wait to tell Richie, to see the joy in his eyes when he realized their dream was finally coming true. She had always wanted to be a mother, and now she would be. Their love, their patience, their healing had brought them here. 6 months later, Ruby gave birth to a healthy baby boy, his cries filling the room as Richie held his son for the first time, tears in his eyes. Evelyn, who had spent months mending the rift she had caused, stood by them, her eyes wet with emotion. "You did it," Evelyn said, looking at Ruby with awe. "You gave me a grandchild." Ruby smiled softly, her heart full. They had made it. They had survived the hardest battle together. Would Lizzy ever find love again? We will find out in the next part. The end